السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أنا آسف للإزعاج لأن بعض منكم راح انتفض كده. ها؟ لو سمحت يا شيخ ضاحي، عاوز تيجي مكاني هنا؟ الله يكرمك. ماشي. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وبعد. Praise be to Allah the Merciful and peace be upon Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. أيها الأحباب، مرة أخرى مع هذه النفحات، المحاضرات الطيبة. Before we start, inshallah, advise everyone to go to the administration and pick up your certificate. But please, my brothers and sisters, getting the certificate doesn't mean that you are mufti already. I know this session is about ifta, but again, we have to go through a lot of process. Inshallah. جزاكم الله خيرا. أسأل الله عز وجل أن ينفع بكم أجمعين. Inshallah, we will start again. Dr. Ma'an will cover for Dr. Suhaib Hassan because he did not get the visa. May Allah be pleased with him and make it easy on him. Ameen. And we will start with our beloved brother Sheikh Al-Allam, mashallah. May Allah be pleased with him and accept him. Dr. Walid, 30 minutes inshallah. جزاكم الله خيرا. فليتفضل مشكورا. المحاضرة عن المذهبية واللامذهبية، الاجتهاد والتقليد والاتباع, between following a specific fiqh school and refusing to acknowledge fiqh school. فليتفضل مشكورا.
None of the merciful, the one who is merciful of the creation. Peace and blessings be upon the Prophet Muhammad and his family, his companions, and his two followers. Inshallah, we'll be speaking about Inshallah, we'll be speaking on these few minutes the issue of a very important issue. It's very important to speak about, and it is the issue of following a madhab or not following a madhab in terms of learning and worshipping and giving fatwa, the methodology in learning and what a person follows in himself and his worship, and giving fatwa. This issue is something that the students of knowledge has kept them busy, and the scholars and the Muslims in general, in America especially, and in all the countries in general. And many of them have split into two opinions. The first opinion, we find that some of the scholars say that following one of the four madhabs, they say it's being static, and they think that it's the reason for backwardness of the ummah and splitting up of the ummah. And they say following a madhab, it's as if it's the opposite of following the sunnah and following the evidences. Those who always talk about following the sunnah, they always think that going against madhabs is the opposite of that. Going with madhabs is the opposite of that. And so they say we're going to learn fiqh not through the madhabs. In this group from the people, they call everyone from the beginning, even a Muslim, that to do his own ijtihad, to take from the sources directly without going through the books of fiqh. And from the negative effects of this, and that when whenever he mentions the correct opinion, he always says there's only three contemporary scholars that we only take their opinion in. The correct opinion, like Ibn Baz and Ibn Uthaymeen and Sheikh Al-Albani, and they're all our teachers and we love them all. But we say that their opinion is the dalil. As for Abu Hanifa and Malik and Shafi and Ahmad, then that goes against the dalil. And we have to go against the four madhabs and those four imams. If these contemporary scholars go against them, we should go with the contemporary scholars. So they try to stay away from taqleed, and they end up making taqleed of others. Instead of doing taqleed of the four, they taqleed of some of the contemporary scholars. The second way that the second opinion is the opposite of this. They fought also the issue of studying the books of Hadith and their explanations. And the early books of Fiqh. Rather, they say the ones who look in the books of Sunnah and looks at Hadith and their commentaries, they made them in one. They say that they didn't. They say that they don't follow the madhab, so that's a problem. That's a mistake. We say they are like the liberals and the enemies of the Sharia, and we find that we put those people in like Imam Shawkani and Sanani and Sheikh Al-Albani, these type of scholars. We make them like the same like Islam al-Bahiri and Salman Rushdie and these enemies of Islam, the enemies of the Sharia. And we find that both sides are extreme. The second group from their negative qualities is that it's very strict in the conditions of giving a fatwa. So they say a student of knowledge, no matter how much he studies and seeking knowledge, and he's able to understand, they say him is just like a regular layman. They shouldn't begin fatwa. And he makes a student of knowledge who's able to understand the opinions of the scholars. He might be, he's not the highest mujtahid, but he has the ability to understand and differentiate between opinions, which one's stronger and which one's weaker. And he has taken the path of knowledge. They make this person like the normal layman who doesn't know anything. And that same person has to follow one mufti and one madhab without going against it in one letter. We'll talk about the types of mujtahids. The mujtahids, the scholars divide them into categories or levels. There's absolute mujtahid, the one who is completely independent in deriving rulings in his own methodology. In deriving rulings, he looks directly into the sources without relying on anyone. And they are like the four imams, and then Awza'i and Layth and Sufyan al-Thawri and Dawood al-Zahiri and Ibn Jarir and Abu Thawr. Those scholars, they are absolute mujtahids. Second type, a absolute mujtahid who follows a madhab. So he's someone who can look directly, but he follows one of the methodology of one of the imams in deriving rulings. So he ascribes himself, even though he himself could do his ijtihad independently, but he ascribes up to a way, like a Qadi Abu Yusuf and Muhammad Hassan, the companions of Abu Hanifa, and Muzani and Buwaiti, companions of Shafi'i. Like a Qadi Abu Yusuf, Muhammad Hassan and Muzani, they they have the conditions of ijtihad in them, absolute ijtihad, but they ascribe to a madhab and followed their methodology in drawing rulings. And there are other levels. You can look at them in there for those in the madhab that can derive new rulings based on what's in the madhab, on new issues. Then we have scholars within one madhab who can pick opinions within a madhab. Those who understand the madhab, but they can pick between the different opinions in a madhab. Now look at the conditions of ijtihad. Every level of ijtihad has its own conditions that the scholars mentioned. Especially the scholars of usul fiqh, they mention in their books. We look in the books of fiqh usually. There's a chapter about ijtihad and taqleed, and the conditions for a mufti and the one who's asking for a fatwa. So look at the conditions for a absolute mujtahid. They mention them there. If we find that there's a difference in what the conditions are between the scholars of usul. So some of them, they made it very hard for the conditions. And they may put conditions that today it's very hard to fulfill. Like when Muhammad said that a person he was asked about a person who memorized 100,000 hadiths. Can he give fatwa? So he said no. How about 200? He said no. Until he went until 300,000. He said, I hope so. And of course, the hadith had different routes and reports and narration. Imam Ahmad used to memorize 1,000,000 hadiths, and Al-Bukhari 700,000. So this all includes different routes and different versions. The point is, if we take these type of opinions, we find there's no one today that can give ijtihad and give fatwa after the time of the period of the four imams. Then no one after them can give fatwa. Then on the other side, we have people who made conditions very easy. So I say, for easy conditions that it's found in many of the students of knowledge in this time. Like they say, having to memorize the Quran. Many of the scholars, they say you don't have to memorize even the whole Quran. Some of them just says you just have to memorize the verses of legislation, ayat al-ahkam, which are like 500 verses. And another opinion is that you don't even have to memorize these verses. You don't even have to memorize them. You can just know them and know where they are in the Quran, so you can find them if you wanted. He read them and he knows where they are. He knows like Siyam verses are in Surah Al-Baqarah and so on. And, like inheritance verses are in Surah An-Nisa. So that when he wants to use them or derive from them, he can go and find them, even so he doesn't even have to memorize them. Similarly, the hadith on legislation, same thing. They say you don't have to memorize them. Like Imam Ahmad said, you don't need to. What Imam Ahmad said, you don't have to memorize them. So or memorize some, like Umdat al-Ahkam, only 400 hadiths, 430. And just a few hundred or something. 500, 700. These hadith of ahkam are limited. Some of them said memorizing, some said no. You don't even have to memorize these. But they said you should be aware of them and know them. And should have studied a book on them, so that he can go back and pick them if he needs. But he doesn't need to have them memorized. And same thing with stipulating the minimum of knowledge in usul fiqh and in Arabic. So these conditions, then maybe ijtihad is found in many of the students of knowledge if we go by these easy conditions. The issue of communal ijtihad, These issues are mentioned in previous lectures. Quickly, you can say communal ijtihad is obligatory for every Muslim individually. So, but it could also be communal. And it has examples from the way of the Salaf. Omar used to combine the people of Badr to ask them. And in Medina, there were 7 scholars from the Tabi'in. They would gather sometimes and research together and talk. So these are like early fiqh councils. So the idea of communal ijtihad is found in the practice of the Salaf. As for the fiqh councils, the mujtahids in it are not all the mujtahideen in the ummah, so their opinion is not ijma'. But the most that can be said about them is that it's one way of doing tarjih, saying which opinion should be stronger, but it's not ijma' if a council gives an opinion. If we say if a person is not allowed to go against these councils, then he's not a mufti, because the mufti has to be a mujtahid, and you can't make a mufti a muqallid for these councils. Because we can't make the mufti follow one of these councils, just like if we say we can't make the mufti only follow one of the 4 madhabs. Some of these councils, there are fatwas that came against them, that went against the majority of the scholars over the centuries. And so it's not necessary that opinion of a council, any council whatsoever, doesn't necessarily mean that it's the correct opinion. Also, the reality is that these councils, especially in Arab countries, Islamic countries, that each council, there's 1 or 2 faqihs in these councils, or every council has 1 or 2 scholars from every country. So one scholar from a country doesn't necessarily mean he's the most knowledgeable person from that country. Sometimes political issues apply, so they'll pick a mufti that's, an agreement to the government or something. He's the one that's sent to the council. That's not say that he's the most knowledgeable person of the country. So, the opinions of the councils doesn't necessarily mean it's an ijma'. But at the same time, there's a lot of good in it. Especially the research papers and so on, they've been very nice. We should benefit from them during new issues of fiqh. Now we'll talk about the issue of taqleed, blind following. Taqleed is following the opinion of a scholar without knowing their daleel, knowing their evidence. That's taqleed. And the scholar said that a layman has to do taqleed, and the common person is someone who does not have the conditions of ijtihad that we mentioned. Especially if they don't have the conditions of the bare minimum of the ijtihad that we mentioned, especially the easy opinion. So this person has to do taqleed. And in the issues of fiqh, no one will run against this except the Mu'tazila and the Zahiriyya. They are the ones who made it obligatory for the common person to do ijtihad in fiqh and do ijtihad himself and look at the evidence himself. So the common person, it's obligatory upon them to taqleed of the mujtahid in the rulings. And you have some of the opinions in the or some quotations in the paper, because Allah said, "Ask the people of knowledge who don't know." So Allah made it obligatory upon the one who does know to ask the one who does know. So the people of knowledge are the ones who give fatwa, and other than them are supposed to ask them. There's a consensus that the common person during the Sahaba, they used to ask the Sahaba. And it takes a lot of effort and time to become a mufti. If everyone had to do it, then no one would be able to work. and there will be anyone to fulfill the other communal obligations. If the muftis differ, the common person should act upon the opinion from whom he trusts. He doesn't have to only pick one madhab. He can go through different madhabs. He just asks any scholar, whoever he trusts, and acts upon his fatwa. And picking between the muftis for the common person is like picking between the evidences for the mujtahid. If the muftis differed, some said halal, some said haram, then there's opinions in the books of usul. Some of the scholars said the common person should follow only one madhab. Another opinion said he should ask who he trusts and just take it, regardless of whether the opinion is easy or hard. Some said he should take the safer opinion. Some said no, he could take the easiest, because the Prophet liked to take the easiest between two things if it was halal. Right, so some said take the safer to protect his religion. So these are all different opinions. We find that some of them, those who, from the first opinion who spoke against those who follow madhab, we find there's people who smoked against them and say that, oh, you don't have dalil by following the madhab. They exaggerate in this, especially exaggerating the issue of saying taqlid is bad. And they reported some texts like, oh, muqallid is like an animal, or that quoted verses about the mushrikeen, that the mushrikeen did taqlid of those who did shirk before them, to try to say taqlid is bad. In reality, these type of statements in texts that they quoted, they also quoted the quote of Ahmad, don't quote me or Malik, follow me or Malik or Shafi'i, but take from where they took. And it's haram for someone to take from us, and so on. These type of quotes, in reality, the answer to them is that these answers, Imam Ahmad and these scholars were talking about other scholars like them. Imam Ahmad was talking to his son Abdullah, who was a scholar, who has the ability to ijtihad himself. So for someone like him, he doesn't do taqlid. These are the kind of people that these texts are directed towards. They're talking to their major students who are scholars in their own right. So they should be able to look into the evidences themselves. So they're talking to these type of people. At the same time, we find other texts from the same scholars who said the first type of statements who forbade people from looking into texts by themselves. So clearly the first are talking about the scholars, and the second type of texts are talking about the common people. So we understand that the different type of texts are talking to different people, two different categories of people, scholars or non-scholars. So it doesn't mean that we should open the door for the common person to do ijtihad and look at evidence himself. Can the muqallid give a fatwa? Some said al-fatwa was only for mujtahids. And another opinion said mujtahid and muqallid can give a mufti with an opinion of a scholar. And the third opinion is in the beginning that a muqallid is allowed if when there's a need and there's no mujtahid available. But if there's a mujtahid, then they should go back to the mujtahid and ask him. In this case, he's considered, we don't call him mujtahid, but we call this person somebody who's just conveying a fatwa. Because if we say only mujtahid can be fatwa, now what if we don't find any mujtahids? We have students of knowledge who are considered from taqlid, they can give fatwa, like Ibn Qayyim mentioned. He mentioned the opinion of Abu Ya'la. He mentioned his chain to Abu Hussein ibn Shirah. So he said, if a person memorized 5 opinions from Ahmad who gives fatwa with them in the measure, it's allowed. So So a person can convey the opinion of these mujtahids. We also have, is there a category in between called ittiba, the follower, in between the mujtahid and the muqallid? This issue is two different opinions. One denies it completely and one holds on to it completely. So some say no, only mujtahid or muqallid. There's no such thing as follower. Another opinion, they say there is. But he allows it for those who are not qualified for it. So he's saying, I'm a follower, I'm following the opinion of a scholar if I know, when I know his dalil, as opposed to a muqallid who follows the scholar who doesn't know his dalil. So he's saying, I follow the opinions of a scholar, but I know his dalil, so I'm not like a muqallid. The problem is opening the door and making it a way for people who are commoners to enter into ijtihad without being qualified. Some say, I don't like taqleed. Then he says, well, I'm not a muqallid, so what do? If it's not allowed, then that means I have to do ijtihad. Well, he doesn't have the condition of doing ijtihad. He's just a new Muslim, just entering Islam. He said, okay, you can't do taqleed. Well, I'm not a mujtahid. I don't know anything. But I just heard that you can't be a muqallid, it's bad. But I'm not a mujtahid. What do? So say, okay, be in the middle. Know the opinion of the scholar, know his dalil, then you consider it a follower, muttabi'. So this opens the door for the common person to start doing their own ijtihad and look in the texts themselves. But in reality, the follower of ittiba, follower, is mentioned in the statement of some scholars, either implicitly or explicitly, like Ibn Abdul Barr. And similarly, the statement of Imam Shatibi, who's saying the same thing that we just mentioned. Either if you're mujtahid, you have to do your own ijtihad, or you, a person whose fellow has no knowledge at all, and then he has to taqleed. And then in between he says, there's a third. He's not someone who's mujtahid, but he understands the evidences. And so, he understands how to kind of pick opinions. So there's a third middle category here mentioned by these scholars. Anyway, the summary of this issue is that whoever has the least amount of conditions for ijtihad, he studied Arabic, and he memorized the verse of ayat of legislation and the hadith of legislation, the side of usul fiqh and fiqh and hadith. He is able to understand the evidences of the different mujtahideen, and his heart will pick one or the other. He can pick one or the other that's most convincing. Then this person, either we call him mujtahid, who has the least amount of conditions for ijtihad. So at the very least, even if he's not an absolute mujtahid, but he can pick between opinions between the muftis. So either make him an absolute mufti. So we're not going to make him complete muqallid, but we're going to let him pick between opinions. But what's forbidden is opening the door for the common people to do ijtihad under the statement that they are followers. As for the term fiqh al-dalil, the fiqh of evidence, we don't find any scholars using that term like it's used today. Some people say there's fiqh of madhahib and fiqh of evidences, as if the fiqh of evidences is different than fiqh of madhahib. Either you follow one or the other. This usage to these terms is incorrect. We'll say fiqh al-dalil is what in Ibn Albani says, Al-Albani and Ibn Uthaymeen. That's called Fiqh al-Dalil. As for Abu Hanifa and Malik, that's Fiqh of Madhahib. That has no evidence, no dalil. This is not correct. And the person asking a question it is not obligatory for the Mufti to give him the evidence behind his opinion. And Mawardi, he said, a Mufti can just give his opinion, yes or no, halal, haram, without mentioning the evidence. Because there's a difference between giving a fatwa and writing a book. Teaching and writing a book is different. You mention evidences. Fatwa, it can be a short answer. You don't need to give the evidence. Especially since it's hard to tell the person asking the question all the different evidences. There's many different evidences, and combining evidences. It's very hard for someone to explain this to a common person. So sometimes, this very especially the term al-rajih, preponderant. Many people use the term preponderant or rajih today, correctly or incorrectly. Some people use it sometimes by saying that the rajih or the preponderant is not in the madhahib, but I follow the rajih opinion, not the madhahib. They said the rajih is what? Shaykh al-Albani, Shaykh ibn Baz, Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen. That's the rajih. That's the rajih. As for other than that, then that's not from the madhabs. That's the marjuh. So you make one scholar, particularly, he is the scale for what is rajih. So he makes the entire ummah to follow what this one scholar said, or these few scholars said. On the opposite side, we have other side that say there's no such thing as rajih. He says if a scholar or a student knowledge has the level conditions of the ijtihad, they'll say, they pick an opinion. He'll say this person knows, this person is just a rajih. He picks his own opinions. No, the term rajih is mentioned in the books of scholars, but was not meant by that this particular issue by one scholar never issued that he's the rajih that the whole ummah has to follow. What's mentioned as rajih is rajih in the books of fiqh and all the madhahib, but it's a subjective thing. One scholar may think it's rajih, another person may not think it's rajih. It's rajih, the particular scholar is not the same thing. It's not necessarily rajih to another scholar, and it's not necessarily what is 100% correct with what Allah wanted. But it's the ijtihad of a scholar. It's subjective to a scholar's opinion. So don't obligate upon the ummah to follow one opinion about that someone says a rajih. The madhabs emerged during the time of the Sahaba. There were Sahaba who gave fatwa, and from them who didn't give a lot, and some gave middle, some gave a lot. Like Ali ibn Madini in Al-Ilal, he mentions the different Sahaba who gave fatwa. And he mentioned that the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, there were people who followed the madhabs and gave fatwa with their fatwa, and they followed their way in deriving rulings for three Sahaba: Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Zayd ibn Thabit, and Ibn Mas'ud. All three of them had a madhab and companions who followed their madhab, and disciples who followed their madhab and gave fatwa with their fatwa. So thus, madhab were the madhab existed during the time of Sahaba, and he mentioned the followers of every Sahabi of those three, like Al-Qamah with and Aswad ibn Yazid and Masruq and Abida, and Amr ibn Shahbil for Ibn Mas'ud. Those six passed it down to Ibrahim al-Nakhai, for example, and all of them their fiqh led to Abu Hanifa, and the same thing with Ibn Abbas. Ata and Tawus and Mujahid and Jabir ibn Zayd and Sa'id ibn Jubair, they pass it on to Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, and Sufyan al-Uyayni and so on. And then Zayd ibn Thabit, he passed on Sa'id ibn Musayyib and Urwa and Kharija, and the 7 fuqaha of Medina, they took from him. And this ended up with Imam Malik. And so the madhahibs began with the time of Sahaba. And Sahaba did not forbid that there are followers that followed their madhab. And then later, the madhahib developed more, such as writing down the books of usul and their principles, and development of Sahaba. Time ran out. So inshallah, let's rest the papers with you guys. And the Sheikh Said is now mentioning different topics that are left, like the madhabs will make a student's life easier and make it easier. There's many pros for following a madhab and study. And it'll allow you to study many different opinions. Like when you get Mukhtasar Khalil Maliki Fiqh, from the bridge text, you'll see, based on the printed version, the issues, there's 15,700 issues in this matan alone. So the student who doesn't study with 2 madhabs, he's not going to come across all these issues, not even a tenth of it. Most of these issues are not going to be mentioned seen by him. If you just go to the Hadith, are very few issues you'll find, because there's other evidences. But if you go through studying the fiqh and madhabs, you'll come across all these different opinions. Sheikh is saying, mashallah, that's the longest extra minute I ever gave. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
الآن إن شاء الله مع فضيلة أستاذنا الدكتور العلامة الشيخ معن الله يحفظه يا رب. He will represent for Dr. Suhaib Hassan. 30 minutes. 30 minutes American time لو سمحت.
نعم. الباوربوينت يا شيخ
الله
صادق.
خير.
الباوربوينت. الباوربوينت يا شيخ صادق.
أحمد تحب تسويتش؟ تعبت والله. الله يتعب. أنا مش نايم.
شيخنا لسه ما بدأتش العداد يعني. ما بدأتش.
بتكلم في الأحلام كده.
Just let's separate it middle. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم نور قلوبنا بالعلم وزين أخلاقنا بالحلم وافتح بيننا وبين قومنا بالحق وأنت خير الفاتحين ثم أما بعد. The research that I'm presenting is titled The Right Way in the Matter of Ittiba' and Taqleed. The author actually is Dr. Suhaib Hassan, one of the researchers who was supposed to come to the US. For some reason, he could not make it, so I was requested to present his paper. I want to make a disclaimer from the beginning that I'm here to present the research and not to critique the research. So whatever I will be saying represent whatever is mentioned in the research paper. It does not necessarily reflect my personal approach. What does he mean, Dr. Suhaib Hassan, Jazakallah khairan, by the word al-ittiba' and al-taqleed, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, as they say? According to him, al-ittiba', following the book and the sunnah. The one who is muttaba' is the one who goes with the Quran and the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And the opposite to that is at-taqleed, according to him, following one's imam blindly. So if someone is a strict Shafi'i, 100%, or a strict Hanafi, or Maliki, or Hanbali, whatever the madhab might be, then according to Dr. Suhaib, this is a taqleed and not ittiba'. Of course, we might agree, we might disagree, even on this classification. Honestly, I like the research method that he followed, and he was actually very consistent with himself from the beginning of the research all the way until the end. He took a chronological order, going through the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, analyzing the practice or the religious practice of people, okay, the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, and then he went to the Tabi'een, to the successors, and then to the Tabi'een, the third generation. So he said, literally, he said, we are going to explore first the state of the people in the first 3 centuries as how they used to practice their religion. And of course, he made an argument that I will be discussing later on. And then he said, and then to compare it with the way it was followed by later generations till present. Why he is focusing on the very first 3 generations? Because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, خير الناس قرني ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم. The people of my generation are the best, then those who follow them, and then those who follow the latter. What is the argument that he made? He said the following: if we can capture, identify the actual practice of people, like religious practice of people in the first 3 generations, Sahaba, Tabi'een, Tabi'een, and then we found any discrepancy, any contradiction, any otherwise in the practice of the people of the 4th century on, then definitely whosoever comes after the 3rd generation has to go back to the practice of the first 3 generations. That's his argument. And actually he has made it like very clear, referring to the hadith that I just narrated. He started analyzing the practice of people, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. And of course, we cannot disagree that during the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, he was the only source of guidance, the only source of learning, the only source of practice, period. Make no mistake about it. As long as the Prophet ﷺ is present, it was never ever reported that someone challenged the authority by coming up with a fatwa or ijtihad, as long as the Prophet ﷺ is there, available and reachable, accessible to them. However, it did happen several times that a lot of Sahaba, for different reasons, had no choice but to apply their own ijtihad or independent reasoning because of the absence of the Prophet ﷺ. And if you refer to the research, he mentioned a lot of examples. I will limit myself maybe just to one example, which is the very famous hadith when the Prophet ﷺ mandated the Sahaba by saying, لا يصلين أحد منكم العصر إلا في بني قريظة. No one is allowed to pray Salat al-Asr except in Bani Qurayza. What is the point that he wanted to raise here? He said that the Prophet ﷺ did not prevent, did not disallow the Sahaba radiallahu anhum from practicing their own ijtihad as long as there was a reason for that ijtihad. As long as there is a reason for that ijtihad. And what happened is that some of the Sahaba, like one faction of them, have taken the hadith literally So when they were going to Banu Qurayza, subhanAllah, it did happen that it was Asr time in the middle of the road. Some of them went with the book, as they say, and they said, no, we cannot pray Salatul Asr until we reach Banu Qurayza, because that's the exact order of the Prophet ﷺ. And some others said, no, he did not mean it. I mean, he always commanded us to pray on time. But what he meant is that we should be leaving early, so much so that Asr will not be due, unless we are already in Bani Qurayza. Now, the conclusion here is that they reported that ijtihad to the Prophet ﷺ, and he did not deny any of the two different schools of thought. That's the conclusion that he wanted to, of course, he mentioned like different examples when Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu had the wet dream and he could not have a shower, and he led the salah, and then he reported to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, Ya Amr, asallayta bi ashabika wa anta junub. But again, he did not deny his ijtihad. So the conclusion here is that during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, al-mujtahid, or the only one who has a madhab or a way to follow, was exclusively whom? The Prophet ﷺ himself, and everybody actually was following him. But during his absence, Prophet ﷺ did not prevent any of the Sahaba to apply their own ijtihad, and it was like a common practice for them to report to the Prophet ﷺ what happened, in order for him either to approve or to modify or to disapprove. And then he went in a very chronological order, as I said, covering the period of the companions of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. Fortunately, the first century and a part of the second century was covered by the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. He reported that the very last Sahabi to pass away was Abu al-Tufayl Amir ibn Shurahbil radiallahu anhu warda, who passed away in 110 after Hijrah, 110 after Hijrah. So the whole first century is covered, and a part of the second century. He made a very clear point that the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ was the exclusive reference of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. Whenever they have any argument, any disagreement, any debate, any different opinions, whenever a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is raised, then the whole case is dismissed, as they say. And he reported different examples. One of them is when there was a disagreement between the Muhajirin and the Ansar, the Meccan and the Medinites, regarding the taking position or taking the office after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, who's going to be the Khalifa. So some people actually came up with the idea that why do not we have a Khalifa from the Muhajirin and the Khalifa from the Ansar. Abu Bakr, it did happen that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu was there, and then he said, أما إني سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول الأئمة من قريش. Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, Imams are to be from Quraysh. Believe it or not, the whole discussion was over. Why? Because someone reported a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, so there was no point even to further discuss this issue. Another incident, upon the death of the Prophet ﷺ, there was like a variety of opinions where to bury the body of the Prophet ﷺ. And they kept back and forth until Abu Bakr for the second time came and reported a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, whenever a prophet dies, he is to be buried at the very same place where he dies. And believe it or not, the whole discussion was over. And the Prophet ﷺ was buried in the exact spot where he passed away, which was the Hujratu Aisha radiallahu anha wardaha. By the way, Hujratu Aisha was not a part of the masjid, just FYI. And then he moved to the period of the successors of the Tabi'een. He said that the mainstream practice was the same. The mainstream practice was the same, which is to refer to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that could be reported by whom? By only and only the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Tabi'een in general were like not blind followers, but strict followers of the Sahaba, because the Sahaba were the narrators of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He quoted a lot of incidents and examples. Maybe one of them is the statement that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, who was a tabi', who was a successor, who said, radiyallahu anhu wa ardah, the top of the judgment, ra'su al-hikmati, is to follow what is in the book of Allah, and then by what is in the sunnah of the messenger of Allah. So this is again the mainstream practice that the tabi'een were referring to whom? To the Sahaba. Because the Sahaba actually were not like, infallible, but they were the narrators of the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Even after that, when it comes to the four great Imams radiallahu anhum wa ardahum ajma'een wa rahimahumullah ta'ala, Abu Hanifa al-Nu'man, Malik ibn Anas, Shafi'i and Ahmad, he successfully actually reported 4 different statements by them to show clearly that they were not that rigid, they were not that fanatic in applying their own madhab. And the matter of fact, all of them unanimously agreed that they strictly follow the practice and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ whenever it is proven. Of course, they have like different ways and different methodology in how to deal with the hadith. As you all know, as a mashayikh and ulama, some of the hadith might be abrogating a hadith, some of them might be abrogated a hadith, some of them are general, some of them are specific and on and on. But generally speaking, as a methodology, as a way of deriving and extracting rules from the Quran and the Sunnah, whenever the hadith is proven to be an authentic one and there is no otherwise to block it or to stop applying that hadith, then it is actually binding for the whole Muslim ummah. Make no mistake about it. He reported the statement of Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu ardah, إذا صح الحديث فهو مذهبي, my way or my madhab is whatever is proved by an authentic hadith. He reported the statement of Malik ibn Anas radiallahu anhu when he said, كل يؤخذ من قوله ويرد عليه إلا المعصوم صلى الله عليه وسلم. Each of everyone's sayings can be accepted or rejected except for the Prophet of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم. He reported a long statement of Imam Shafi'i. I did not quote it in full. I just took the last part of it when Shafi'i radiallahu anhu said, how can I report something from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and not agree with it? كيف أروي حديثا عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا آخذ به. Of course, there was a reason, for this statement. What happened exactly is that he was narrating a hadith, and one of his students said, "Ya Imam, this is what the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام said. What do you say?" So he, like his face turned red, and he was became very angry. And he said, "How come that even you ask me this question, that the Prophet ﷺ himself is reporting a hadith, and then you ask me what is my opinion?" And then he said, كيف أروي حديث عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا آخذ به. And then Imam al-Sunnati في عصر Ahmad ibn Hanbal رضي الله عنه وأرضاه, he said, do not follow, maybe Sheikh Walid Jazallah Khair reported this or narrated this statement, do not follow me or Malik or Shafi or Al-Awza'i or Al-Thawri, but make from or take from where they took from, meaning the Quran and the Sunnah. Again, and I want to make like another disclaimer that this statement was mentioned or was said by Ahmad rahimahullah to the professional and very advanced students of knowledge. It's not for everybody. It's not for the Ammi or for the layman people. So he made himself clear that even the 4 great madhahib that we follow nowadays strictly and sometimes unfortunately blindly, if you go to the founders of the madhahib themselves, those are the people who ordered us not to strictly and blindly follow them. So if you are like a sincere follower of Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu warda, you should not follow him blindly, because this actually was his command rahimahullah. Moving forward, he indicated that during the time of the tabi'een, along with the a'imma who came right after the tabi'een, because Abu Hanifa was not a tabi'i, was among tabi'een as you all know, Malik radiallahu anhu, the same among the tabi'een. He said that during that time, there were like a well-distinct, well-differentiated 2 different schools of thought. Okay? Some people were called people of al-hadith, people or ahlul hadith, and the opposite to that is ahlu al-rai. And then he mentioned some analysis behind the inception of those 2 different schools. He said that the head of the Ahlul Hadith during his lifetime was Malik ibn Anas radiallahu anh, simply because he was residing in Al-Madinah ala sakina salatu wassalam. And Al-Madinah actually was the source, not a source, was the source of knowledge at that time. Because the vast majority of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum have chosen to reside where? In Al-Madinah. And the Sahaba radiallahu anhum are the narrators of the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. That knowledge was inherited from one generation to another all the way until that knowledge was received by whom? By Malik ibn Anas. So no wonder that Malik ibn Anas was the head of the Ahlu al-Hadith during his lifetime. What happened is that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu has chosen to relocate and to go to Al-Kufa. He was one of the narrators of the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and he delivered the knowledge that he has at that time to the tabi'een, okay? And the tabi'een have narrated that knowledge to the tabi'i at-tabi'een. If you want to make a quick comparison between the two, when it comes to the abundance or the availability of hadith, there is no way to compare between the number of hadith available in Al-Kufa versus the number of hadith, okay, that were available in Al-Madinah. That's why no wonder that Abu Hanifa al-Nu'man radiyallahu anhu arda was the head of Ahlu al-Ra'i during his lifetime. Not because he was insisting in following his opinion, not because he was so rigid in denying the hadith, وحاشاه. The only issue was the number of hadith at that time, very, very limited comparison to the amount of hadith available to Malik ibn Anas radiallahu anhu arda. And I want to connect this with the statement of Abu Hanifa himself when he said, إذا صح الحديث فهو مذهب. You just give me a hadith and I will embrace it. I will take it. So it was an issue of the availability of the hadith, not whether to go with the hadith or not to go with it. Even during that period, even though there was a clear-cut distinction and differentiation between Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith, he mentioned a good point here, which is there were some exceptions. There were some exceptions. Okay. Before the exceptions, let me just go with the slides. Difference between the two schools. Maybe this statement, actually I underlined it because it might need to be rephrased or to be reworded. He said, difference between the two schools. He was talking about Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith. He said the difference between the two schools is lies in their adherence to the Sunnah. This is a very confusing statement. Very confusing. Of course, he did not mean it. Okay, but he said that lies in their adherence to the Sunnah. I mean, if you read this particular statement, you might get the impression that Ahlul Hadith, depend on the Sunnah, and Ahlul Ra'i deny the Sunnah, which is, of course, not the case. And then he further elaborated by saying, whereas the first group, meaning Ahlul Hadith, the first group depended mostly on the evidence from the Sunnah and refrained from employing their opinion in case the evidence was not available. If there is a hadith, they would just issue a fatwa upon the hadith or based or derived from the hadith. If there is no hadith, they would say, La adri, I have no answer. That was the common practice of Ahlul Hadith. And then he said, the other group would freely exercise their opinions in a similar situation. And then to elaborate more, which is something that I really appreciate, he said opinions here means ijtihad based upon analogy or qiyas, analogical deduction, and general benefit, al-maslahatul mursala. So the number of hadith were very limited, and people are approaching Abu Hanifa, and he has no choice but to come up with an answer. If there is no straightforward answer to that question from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he would apply analogy, analogical deduction, and just apply in qiyas and come up with an opinion or a fatwa or a madhahib, whatever you want to call it, and just move on. So this is the major difference between the two different schools of thought. He said that although the two different schools of thought were completely distinct from one another, there were some exceptions, and that's absolutely correct. Rabi'a radiallahu anhu, one of the tabi'een, was one of the most influential mashayikh and scholars who influenced Malik ibn Anas. Okay, what's confusing here a little bit is that Malik ibn Anas radiallahu anhu was the head of the Ahlul Hadith during his lifetime. And guess what? his sheikh was the head of Ahlul Ra'i, so much so that he was called even Rabi'at al-Ra'i, Rabi'a, the one of the opinion. But Malik radiallahu anhu did not mind at all benefiting from the opinion and the methodology and the way of thinking of his sheikh Rabi'at al-Ra'i radiallahu anhuma. Another exception is that it was well known, especially for the Hanafi followers nowadays, that Abu Yusuf and Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani were labeled as Ahlul Hadith, or among the leaders of Ahlul Hadith, although they both were the followers of whom? Of Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. Abu Hanifa was the head of the Ahlul Ra'i during his lifetime. And they did not mind at all, labeling themselves as the followers and the students of Abu Hanifa al-Nu'man, although they disagreed with their Imam, according to some resources, up to 2/3 of the madhab. You read Abu Muhammad al-Hasan al-Shaybani, Abu Yusuf one opinion, and Abu Hanifa al-Nu'man another opinion. Yet they did not mind at all having the honor of being the followers of Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhum ajma'in. The period from the 4th century till present, honestly, he did not cover this period in the same level of depth that he covered the first 3 centuries. However, what he narrated actually, I would say, was sufficient enough to come up with a conclusion that rigidity, fanaticism, factionalism, and sectarianism started to appear in the Muslim society at that time. People started following their imams blindly in a very rigid way. Okay? They disregarded and did not appreciate, they disrespect even the intellectual work of the different imams. And he went on and on and mentioning examples. He said that it's really unfortunate to say that some of the people of knowledge were just strict followers for a certain madhab only for some worldly benefit. Because like during the 5th and the 6th, the 7th, the 8th century, the grand mufti or the grand judge at that time, used to be like a blind follower of a certain madhab. And if you follow his madhab, you will be entitled to be a judge. You will get a position of being the judge of that city. So in order for me to be a judge or to be a mufti, I have to change my opinion. I have to switch from one madhab to another and to embrace, the Hanafi, for example, school of thought, in order for me to be like, appointed or hired as a judge or as a mufti. He mentioned another, example that at a certain point, even around al-Kaaba al-Musharrafa, there were like 4 different maharib. To show how bad it went at that time. That whenever it is Maghrib time, for example, or Asr time in particular, okay, the Shafi'i Imam would start the Salah, and only the Shafi'iyya, the blind followers of Imam Shafi'i, would pray behind him, and then the Maliki Imam after that would come, and then the Maliki blind followers would pray behind him. Okay, after 1 hour, it is like Asr time, according to the Hanafi school of thought. Then Imam al-Hanafiyyah يتقدم ويصلي خلفه الأحناف. It is ridiculous. It reached to a level where knowledge became the source reason behind the disunity of the ummah. He did not mention the following example, but I'm going to say it. You read one of the shuruh of the Hanafi school of thought. وهل يجوز, listen to this, وهل يجوز للحنفي أن يتزوج بشافعية. That's a مسألة. Is it permissible for a Hanafi man to get married with a Shafi'i woman? And then that mufti, جزاه الله خيرا, قبح الله قوله, he said, نعم يجوز قياسا على الكتابية. Yes, والله الذي لا إله غيره. I'm really sad to say it, but this is what happened actually. And it is reported. He said, yes, it is permissible because the Shafi'iyya lady or woman takes the same rule of the Kitabiyya one. So he made an analogy, okay, between the Shafi'iyya and the Nasraniyya and the Yahudiyya. To that extreme, to that extent. So I do not blame him when he was, I would say, very conservative when it comes to blindly following certain madhahib, because this is what the Muslim Ummah have been experiencing and struggling for a certain period of time. Then to come up with a constructive solution, he raised the question, having said that we have like different schools of thought and different imams and different usul and different furu' and different qawa'id, whom to follow? And then he referred to the hadith of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, لا تزال طائفة من أمتي على الحق ظاهرين لا يضرهم من خذلهم حتى يأتي أمر الله وهم كذلك. I am not sure if that hadith could be applied to this particular situation, but he said that, according to him, or at least what I understood from what he said, that Ahlul Hadith are those people who are follow that hadith. A group from among my ummah would remain abiding by the right or al-haq, who would be seen and not hidden. If someone forsakes them or opposes them, no harm would reach them until the day of judgment, etc., etc. So he concluded by saying that Ahlul Hadith are the people who have been meant by the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ mentioned above. However, he became more lenient a little bit and more practical by saying following the madhahib is fine as long as you do not blindly follow a madhab, and as long as you are open to change your opinion or to change your practice if it is proven for you that another madhab is more authentic than your own madhab. He said, we believe that all such people, even though they had attributed themselves to one of the fiqh madhahib, they fall in this category, listen to this, as long as they were not prejudiced to their own madhab to the extent of discarding a sahih hadith or a clear sunnah only because the madhab dictates otherwise. So he made a kind of, I would say, a kind of balance. According to him, it's okay to be a follower of a certain madhab as long as you are open to change your mind or to change your opinion or practice or madhab if it is proven for you that other madhab are more authentic than yours. He said that, alhamdulillah, nowadays the situation is not as bad as it was before.
2 minutes. Sure.
He said that the situation nowadays is not as bad as it was before. And he referred to the common practice of contemporary fiqh councils nowadays by saying that the fiqh councils in general do not depend on a certain opinion. They are open for different madhahib. Sometimes even they exceed the limits of the four madhahib, and they might embrace an opinion by Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, who was a mujtahid, and he came up with his own ijtihad in different masail, going with Imam al-Shawkani. And this is absolutely correct. My personal experience as a member in the resident fatwa committee of AMJA for the last 13 or 14 years, alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, proudly I'm saying today that during this long period of time, I have never ever noticed that any of the members of the resident fatwa committee is trying to push, or to give more preference for his own madhab. I am a Shafi'i by background. Maybe I studied the Shafi'i school of thought more than other madhab. Sheikh Walid al-Binasi is a Hanbali by background. Sheikh Salah al-Sawi, believe it or not, is a Maliki by background. During this long period of working with the respected mashayikh, I have never ever, it never ever came even to my mind that one of those members is trying to push or to give preference or more weight for any of the madhab. The very common practice between all of us, the 7 members, is to be as easy as possible, as practical as possible, and coming up with rules as applicable as possible for the Muslim community. That's something that, alhamdulillah, we are so proud of. In conclusion, he said, in our opinion, referring to himself, that is the right approach which should be followed by all scholars of Islam. The layman is advised according to the Quran, referring to the ayah, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, to ask the people of knowledge if he himself lacks the knowledge about a certain issue. Subsequently, it is incumbent on the scholar to whom the question is raised to answer in the light of the evidence available to him, not through blind following of certain imams. This is briefly what Dr. Suhaib Hassan presented to this convention. Jazakumullah khairan wa sallallahu ala Muhammad.
Takbir. MashaAllah.
How's my time management?
Perfect, Sheikh. Can you do the next session? Now we have the question and answer session until 11 o'clock. So if you have a question, please take your seat either at the right or at the left, and our sister also. And we go in to start, and you name the sheikh or the scholar that you want him to answer your question. Jazakumullah khairan. Brother Muhammad Badr.
السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الأخ أنا متردد في هذا السؤال ولكن نبدأ إن شاء الله، وهو لماذا لا
Can you speak up, please?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لماذا لا نسمي هذه المحاضرة
Why don't we call this lecture
المنهجية في
the
الإسلام؟
methodology in Islam,
المنهجية ولا منهجية؟
or methodology and not methodology? Why do we call it madhabs and not madhabs?
ونصر على
And we
التقليد
say taqleed
والاتباع،
or following,
لأن
because
فهيم
understanding of taqleed and following
يعني مثبت للهمم في بعض
will make us not want to try to reach ijtihad.
المذهبية ولا
Madhabs and not madhabs, also, it's not clear
أي مذهب
which madhab that should we follow and not follow.
فإذا ضربت مثل
So
توضيح
if I give an example,
في دراسة
or if you give an example for studying the prophets
من نوح عليه
from
السلام
Noah
إلى رسالة سيدنا محمد
until Muhammad sallallahu
صلى الله عليه وسلم، نجد في كل
You'll find
رسالة في شريعة
in every religion or every message was a different law and particular methodology.
لما ننتقل إلى
But when we get to
العلمي
academic discussion
يعني أنا ما عايز أقول الإفتاء
and if
جزاك
that
الله خيرا أستاذ محمد. واضح.
وضحت؟
بارك الله فيك. الله يكرمك يا رب. أي المشايخ إن شاء الله.
الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد. يعني هو المصطلحات يعني لا
from the terms,
التوقف عندها كثيرا.
we shouldn't worry about the terms. What we should care about what's meant.
لكن يعني كلمة المنهجية
So the terms of the term methodology is too general than what we're trying to speak about.
يعني خاصة
We're speaking particularly
مقصودة المنهجية، يعني ذكرت مناهج الأنبياء
because methodology can mean prophets, the way of the prophets like you mentioned.
المنهج يعني
And so the methodology,
منهج يعني في لكل جعلنا منكم شرعة ومنهاجا.
like the prophet said, Allah said everyone was sent with a law and a methodology. If you mean methodology by theology, then of course all the madhab, fiqh madhabs and their scholars, we have the same methodology in terms of theology
بهذا المعنى
in that regard.
لكن لكون
But
الحديث يعني
we're talking now about
تحديدا عن
the issue of
مصطلحات موجودة
the terms used today, like madhab and not madhab. So we have to use those terms in our lecture because we're talking about these things.
الكلام عن المذاهب الأربعة والله تعالى أعلم. بارك الله فيك.
جزاكم الله خيرا. السؤال الثاني تفضل شيخ.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
عليكم السلام.
سؤالي
A question
متعلق
as regards
بالمصوبة
the issue.
والخطئة.
The people in Usul Fiqh who said all opinions are correct or not all opinions are correct. So Allah doesn't tell us what He intended. So He allowed us to do ijtihad. And if we take the opinion that the Ammi can be guided by Allah, of course, then why can we not say that Allah can guide a scholar to the truth? Can we say are they all correct or not correct? The second question is that does following and taqleed and ijtihad change with different means? Like we have communication modes it differs based on time and place and time. Maybe taqlid is better before, but now the time changed
فتحت أبواب
because we have to open the doors of knowledge.
ربما السؤال الأول للشيخ وليد والسؤال
First question, Sheikh Ali. Second question, Sheikh Ma.
الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد بخصوص
With regards to
مسألة يعني هل
does
الاختلاف الفقهي
difference of fiqh, are all the statements
كلها صواب
correct
أو أحدها
or only one of them correct?
خطأ
That is not correct.
كل مجتهد مصيب
Every mujtahid correct or not?
طبعا
This is an issue of usul fiqh.
تجدونها في
You'll find it
كل كتاب
in all book of usul fiqh.
كل مجتهد
Is every mujtahid correct or not? In reality,
العملي
the practical
العملي لهذا
issue, for the practical matters of this issue,
يعني ليس
this is not big. There's no really practical benefit. It's not important.
خلاف نظري
It's theoretical more than practical.
إنه سواء قلنا يعني
Whether we said that the truth is one with Allah or the truth is more than one,
مصيب هو واحد
and the one who gets it right is only one, or they're all correct. In the end, we don't know.
اختلف مثلا
You know, if Abu Hanifa and Malik differed who is correct with Allah, we don't know.
الصواب والآخر مخطئ فهو
So in reality, even if the truth is all correct, or the truth is one, and the other is not correct,
طالما نحن لا
and as long as we don't know and we can't be sure,
نختلف إمامنا
then if two imams differed, we don't have
آية أو حديث
any verse or hadith that we can use and say that this is the correct and not correct.
واحد
So,
هو واحد منهما
so the one of them is correct, but we don't know who.
فهو في النهاية
So in the end,
ستظل
the differences will still exist,
مجال أن
and will there be room
إذا كان الإنسان
for a person,
مقلدا
if he's a follower and muqallid, to do taqlid of who he was. And if he's a mujtahid, then he should exert his ability in picking one of the two opinions
حسب يعني
based on his understanding.
بخصوص يعني أن الله سبحانه
As
وتعالى
for
يهدي
Allah
أهل العلم
guides the people of knowledge,
قد يكون
maybe
يعني المقصود بالسؤال
what is meant by the question,
يتفق كلهم على
why did they not all accept? Why they did not agree? Why did they differ?
دعوة
This is many people say, the people, why did the ummah, all the ummah be on one madhab? Why do they differ? Why can't Allah make them all agree? The answer is that
ممكن
this is not possible.
يعني هذا الأمر غير
This is not possible.
يعني قدر
In terms of Allah's predestination, nor is it asked of us legally. The Sahaba used to differ,
في مسائل ويتناقشون فيما بينهم
and they used to discuss issues amongst each other.
لم
And they were not told that you have to follow one or not someone else.
مثلا الإمام مالك رحمه
Imam Malik would refuse
تجتمع
that the ummah would
الطائفة
agree upon as only his muwatta,
وإلى آخره يعني
etc. So the point is, this is not possible in terms of predestination, nor is it asked of us legally. The prophets would do ijtihad themselves if there was no revelation. And they did ijtihad, and then the revelation would come in correct.
اجتهادهم أو تنزل مثلا آية معاتبة
So a verse will come down that speak to the prophet, guiding him to the truth or correct.
حتى الأنبياء
Because even the prophets did ijtihad.
اجتهدوا قد يكون اجتهاد
Sometimes their ijtihad is correct, and sometimes it's not correct.
داود
When
وسليمان
Dawood and Sulaiman did ijtihad,
وداود وسليمان إذ يحكمان في الحرث إذ نفشت فيه غنم القوم وكنا لحكمهم شاهدين ففهمناها سليمان
so Sulaiman is Allah mentions that Sulaiman, his ijtihad was more correct than the ijtihad of Dawood. So even the prophets make ijtihad and differ. So it's not possible to not differ.
بأن يأخذ صاحب الزرع يأخذ الغنم تعويضا عن زرعه وسليمان عليه السلام حكم أنه يأخذ الغنم مؤقتا وليس بصفة دائمة
جزاكم الله خيرا.
نعم.
بارك الله فيك.
بارك الله.
القصة طبعا موجودة في التفسير إن شاء الله ترجمة عليه إن شاء الله. بارك الله فيك. أخي الكريم لو سمحت فضلا can you repeat the second question or you already forgot it شيخ؟
Say it in English, inshallah. as we mentioned, that Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he had different ijtihadat because of the availability of hadith, etc. And in modern times, when the knowledge and communications have opened up in many different ways, we can connect and read all of the books of all of the madhahib. Is there any change in the way of doing taqleed or doing ijtihad? And is what the mujaddideen, like Sheikh Ibn Baz and Sheikh Al-Albani, is that something that could be needed for this present time?
يعني أخي الكريم باختصار الحكمة ضالة المؤمن أن وجدها فهو حق الناس به.
Wisdom is the property of a believer. Whoever finds it can take it. And so anything that allows us to give us more knowledge and facilitates this to help us, then there's of course no thing that would prevent us from using it, and if it leads us to change a fatwa, no problem. Because it will help us understand the reality of an issue. And a ruling on something is based on us understanding it. But there are conditions and restrictions. Some issues, even if the ways of understanding it differ, the ruling is still the same. For example, the issue of witnesses. We have two ways in terms of punishments. Either someone admitting or witnesses. If someone commits zina or something, and he wants using surveillance camera or something to prove that, or audio recording, does that change the ruling that the had, the punishment, only can be through admitting and witnesses? It does not change. We could use it as corroborating evidence, but it's not. It doesn't lead us to change anything. Some issues, like the issue of seeing the moon, we know that the scholars, most of the scholars, they say you have to see the moon. Even if we use the way that's a modern term, way to look at the moon, and you have the opinion that you have to use your sight. You have to use your sight, or are you going to use other technology? Even with the technology, you're not going to change anything. We might use technology to help us come to the conclusion, but that's not going to be the way we come to the conclusion. So in general, differences of technology may change some rulings and how we get to rulings, and may not, based on the type of rulings.
جزاكم الله خيرا. السؤال للأخوات إن شاء الله إذا كان هناك سؤال. أخوات جزاك الله خير.
السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام ورحمة
الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. جزاكم الله خيرا.
May Allah reward you for this panel session. That's very beneficial. I don't have a question, but I want to say with some advice that my father gave me before he passed away with a few days. Few words.
دقيقة ونصف.
من هو الوالد رحمه الله حتى بس نتعرف.
اسمي زينب طه جابر العلواني.
أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا.
بارك الله.
I'm Dr. Zainab Jabir Alwan.
ومجدد وفقيه رحمة الله عليه.
بارك الله فيك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
My father told me,
أقدس العدل وأمجد الحرية.
and I respect justice and equality, and I want to help the weak and the poor, and I advise the rich to give the poor their money. And I tell the poor that the rich need to take care of them. I like goodness, and I call to goodness. I hate evil, and I reject violence. I love gentleness and guidance and the truth. I fight the evil of falsehood, and I forbid the evil. I want correction, and I hate wars. I love peace. I love life, and I want to make it a blessed life. I fear death, but I know it's a bridge that I have to cross to reach to the everlasting land. I hope a good ending, and I ask Allah to protect me from evil ending.
Sorry. I'm sorry, just give me 1 minute, 1 second. I'm so sorry. Just a minute.
ربما تكملي في وقت آخر إن شئت.
لا، هي كلمات قليلة، لكن فقط ضاعت علي هذه. أحب الجنة.
I like paradise and I hate hellfire. I like safety and I hate anxiety. I hate detestation. And I'm not someone who speaks ill or curses. My descendant goes back to Adam and Eve. Adam is my father, and Eve is my mother. And all of us are our brothers and sisters. I don't hate any of them. And I'll try to help him and guide him, and guide the path for him, and take his hand to Jannah, and try to keep him away from hellfire. I love generosity. I love all my neighbors. I love all gardens that have any natural manners. Allah created me, and He will create me again. And I call to truth in this world, and I try to find peace and safety in it. And safety is my goal, and to it I call. To it is my destination. Peace is my goal. And I do like conflict. I want safety. I am a Muslim.
جزاكم الله خير وبارك الله فيك.
جزاك الله خيرا شكر الله لك.
Many masajid, those who attend the masajid, are a deep blend. 50% are Hanafis, and the remainder are from three other madhahib for the most part. So with regards to the Imam, many of our brothers, for example, follow the Hanafi madhab. They're asked to be given fatwa on their madhab, and so the Imam leading them, myself, we say we wish to follow the majority of the madhab. So there's like three madhabs on a view, will be with the majority. So is this method for unification acceptable? That's my question. As Dr. Manisi mentioned earlier, some people say we are a Salafi and say this is a Salafi masjid as a result of and this person will have it otherwise. I have some brothers that have no background in knowledge or academic focus, and he speaks and answers questions. That I'm in the safe sector otherwise. So how do we put an end to this? I should say a prelude for Sheikh Salah. Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi. Allah bless your steps and your presence. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the grantor of mercy. I had alluded previously that having a madhab is not rejected nor accepted, meaning in the absolute sense. It can be accepted so long as there is no blind cultish partisanship, and it's not rejected so long as it doesn't oppose a clear ijma agreement of the scholars and clear text in the Quran and Sunnah. There are many, us here, we have more of a mix and a blend that we have to manage, greater diversity between the madhahib, as opposed to some countries where every locality has a clear majority regarding the madhab that they follow and understanding Islamic law. A person comes from the subcontinent with a certain madhab, those come from North Africa. And so when we get together in one masjid, what do? Do we just raise our swords against each other? Or is there a mechanism to interface these madhab with each other? The principle, the rule of thumb, if you will, you do not denounce or condemn people or views that are open to ijtihad, to scholarly discretion. Whomever believes the certain position is stronger, they act upon it without denouncing the other view. The second principle, that the imam is to be obeyed in matters of ijtihad. If an imam is Hanafi or Hanbali or Maliki or Shafi'i, he's leading the prayer and he applies his ijtihadat, his conclusions based on his research, to the way he's going to be praying, we follow. So So we have to follow him in practice. We don't have to follow him in our beliefs. Meaning we don't have to believe that his view is the strongest view, but we have to believe that we must follow this Imam and not diverge from him while in the same prayer as him, while he is the Imam of that particular prayer. The Imam is made to be followed or obeyed. But the majority of is Maliki or Shafi or Hanabila, there that would be fine to pick a particular madhab for that masjid. That's fine as well, so long as it's agreed upon. So long as we put together a form of uh, mechanism, agreement, constitution that can help us navigate our different perspectives that we come with from our scholarly heritages that we follow in the lands that we migrated from. Allah bless you and raise your rank. My question is for Dr. Eid Manisi. With regards to choosing a stronger view between madhahib and secondary issues, what some people call the stronger view, if we say independent ijtihad, where you're directly extracting from the Quran and Sunnah, is gone in non-new events, like just in Salah and Zakat, things like this. And so how can there be any way to looking for a stronger opinion for a person that doesn't know the fundamentals upon which that opinion was built? The answer to this question is that choosing the stronger view is a relative matter. It's not an absolute evaluation that everyone would see the same way in the entire ummah. Matters of the practical issues of practice. But we can't say the stronger view to the whole ummah. No, the whole ummah does not see that view as clearly the right view. It is relative. And those that have the tools to perform ijtihad, but discerning between the school views of the scholars, which is a lesser level of ijtihad, but still ijtihad, then that person who's able to compare should act upon what he believes is stronger. That would be the stronger view to them. So, for example, a contemporary faqih researches the issue of saying Bismillah out loud in Salah, or Al-Fatiha being rukn or something, meaning in a loud verse. And so a person, if they have the ability to understand exactly the argument being made, how the evidence is being used by both sides, then that person can compare in that one issue, in that one ruling. That would be ijtihad of comparisons. So like assisted ijtihad, not the ijtihad where you independently extrapolate views directly from the Quran and Sunnah, but to be able to discern what is more likely or what seems stronger from the different madhahib. Salam.
I would say, first of all, that the religious freedom that we have in the United States give us the right to practice whatever we want. But as you know, adhering to any religious rule is a personal choice. You cannot enforce that in your own community unless you have the power of government. And that power is not given to you by the government. They give you the space to choose to practice your way. But they don't give you the power to enforce these rulings over people, unless they themselves enter a contract and basically choose this lifestyle, choose these things that they want to practice as part of the religion. And that the government will not be involved in basically, or give you the power to enforce that. Because at the end of the day, the only law that citizens of the United States must obey will be the U.S. law. That's basically as the country runs. So I'm not sure if what you applies by Jewish community or the Amish. We can't enforce these laws because people don't voluntarily choose to be part of it. You see what I'm saying? So the same thing for the Muslim community. And that's something that in practice that the Muslim community. Yes, we would like to see more, more involvement, but that will be if Muslim community are more active in politics, more active with the constitutions makers and the lawmakers, or not constitution makers, the lawmakers in the United States. And that requires from us to vote, since voting is coming soon, and encourage all the imams and all the community leaders to make sure that they mobilize their countries and to make sure that they are active, to make the right choice, especially in the local government. And at the same time, politics, as you said, the mother milk of politics is money. We as a Muslim community, we demand a lot of things, but we're not willing to pay. We're not willing to contribute. We're not willing to vote. We're not willing to take the steps that lead to that. So if we became more active in this area, I think more results will be seen.
Any question on the sister side? No question.
Okay. And our hearts rejoice by gatherings like these. The circle of remembrance, one of the gardens of paradise. We're so blessed and honored and happy to be among you. Just ask you to help push back with us against the the wrong fatwa, like those that permit riba, interest-bearing transactions. And suggesting that there be a circle that certifies people as being competent and having the aptitude to give fatwa, and I mean, an approvals committee of sorts. He said, "I'll accept the answer from any sheikh. I love them all." May Allah bless you and reward you all, akhi. Mentioned that fatwa is informing the Islamic ruling. As Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah and others said, the Mufti is the agent between Allah and between His slaves. And that's why he named his book Al-Waqi'in. Basically, this means the great scholars who make i'lam, who inform and sign. Muwaqqi'in, tawqi' means sign, who sign on behalf of the Lord of the worlds. The scholars are those who do that. And so being people that graduate, a long time ago, he mentioned Sayyid Aftami, he was, the head of a department in the university and he had no degree. And so there is a move in the right direction. Sheikh Abu Zahra Mustafa Zarqa. This was a teacher of teachers in our time, and they were not given these positions. Now that age is over, inshallah. Now we have colleges that have specialties and departments for Sharia and Fiqh, even in secular universities. Now a person can be graduated a degree in Sharia, just like a medical degree. You have a Sharia degree. This is something that has grown a great deal. Even subspecializations. You don't just have a doctor. You have an eye doctor and ear doctor and the likes. Likewise, there's eye doctors, optometrists, and different kinds of them. And in the Sharia, there's the same thing. And so the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets, but these scholars are those experts in propagation, those in explaining the Quran. Every one of these has a role. It's an excellent contributor to the advancement of Islam, and at times they contribute in other ways as well. Sometimes they can even have worldly expertise as well, be physicians by practice in their careers and specialize in Sharia. And so the fatwa needs to come from these types of people, and they have to continue promoting that, endorsing that, encouraging that. Someone was able to pull fatwa from their sources. There are these other conditions as well, that go without saying, like being someone trustworthy, not being someone who's fasiq, being someone who's adult, sane,
علماء الأمة الآن في الجامعة العربية مخابرات أجهزة أمن
not be double agents. Some may say that even half the scholars in our lands these days are informants or work for national security.
حسن السيرة والسلوك المعاصر بالإضافة معرفة الواقع.
And another the conditions is understanding the waqa. And so people that here in America understand the English language and know their customs and traditions. And they have more right than us to give the fatwa, to understand the waqa, the reality. I was in Emirat, they asked me about Urfi marriage, which is basically undocumented marriages. I answered based on what I thought Urfi was, because we have Urfi in Syria and Egypt. And turns out that in Emirat, they say Urfi marriage, different kinds of. So the customary usage of the word Urfi to begin with was referring to a completely different, I guess, marital framework or type of marriage. The issue of polygyny. I came from Syria, and someone asked me about polygyny. I cannot imagine that someone would say we cannot have multiple wives. This is something I've never heard of, something I've never experienced. But that's a gap in my awareness of the waqa here. This example that scholars give. Allah, the Quran itself says, fulfill your contracts. You came to this country with a contract. And the Prophet ﷺ said that, fulfill your contract. Go to Pakistan and marry 3 and 4. Go to other country.
القوانين الأمريكية نظام السلام يا أخي تمشي حسب نظام
You agree to follow the traffic laws here. You can't follow the traffic laws of anything else. And you follow these laws.
Let's say now we are going to have a short presentation about how we read.
Allah, all praise be to Allah, peace and blessings be upon His Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Al-Hakim rahimahullah narrates the good chain from Umar radiallahu anhu. He said to his companions one day, wish, he said, we wish that this place was filled with gold to be spent in the path of God and given charity. He said, wish something else. He said, I wish this house was filled with rubies and jewels and treasures to be spent in the path of God and treasure. And he said, make more wishes. We don't know what else. So he said, so someone said to him, what do you wish? He said, I wish it was filled with men like Abu Ubaidah and Salim and Hudayfa ibn Yaman. I wish for true men. As the Prophet said, people are like camels. You hardly find among any 100 of them one true, formidable, unbreakable ride. So they wished for that it be filled with gold and silver and treasures. Umar wished that it would be filled with men that would build the future of this ummah. And that's why I wish to say a statement. It's a great thing. Someone that you all know, but you don't know the effort that he spends and the work that he does. Only Allah knows that. Only Allah can repay him. Allah. I say it from the depths of my heart. And that's testimony for Allah. I'm testimony to you. That we honor him at this moment. He was not expecting this. And he's probably very shocked. Takbir! Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Aywa Rabbi. All of these days are his work. All of these days are his work. In every segment, every corner, whether it's food or a camera, or there's not a place that he hasn't checked us. And we ask Allah, with his loftiest names and attributes and his mercy toward all things, to bless him in his health and his family and his wealth and his children, and to compensate him for what he sacrificed and gave up in the service of the scholars, and repay him with strength in his body and expanse in his provisions and righteousness in his offspring and tranquility in his heart and a good ending for his life. Allahumma ameen. And I know all of you wish to give him a gift, a symbolic gift, a very symbolic gift. It means it's nothing but an expression of our gratitude, but his worth is so much more than that. Then we say, if we would have gifted you anything for your value, we would have gifted you this whole world with us at your service in it. Allahu Akbar.
First of all, alhamdulillah, I am so blessed and I am so thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I got to stand you mind if we go to the next line? Yeah, the next one from your side.
It's a conspiracy, Amr. It's a conspiracy. Oops. Muhammad, that open your hands, first of all. I apologize for the video that was presented yesterday. It was a bit difficult that we affected people in a way that we didn't know. And so we apologize for sharing something that people don't know about. The second thing about an issue that happened in Yemen, a fatwa can be given about it. One of your sisters, she went to go sell her kidney to spend on her orphans.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. طبعا السيد التعريف بأن
We ask Allah to remove his anger and his punishment from us, and to have mercy on our elderly and our women and our children, and to extend his kind of care. And we ask Allah to destroy the enemies of the innocent. What my brother mentions about this part of the world has parallels in different parts of the world. The person doesn't know who to be devastated for anymore, because the crises of the Ummah are so many, and they're similar. And we ask Allah to remove his punishment and his anger that has befallen us. We ask Allah to not call us to account what the foolish have said. We ask Allah to not call us to account what the foolish have done. We ask Allah to grant this Ummah a state where the righteous are uplifted and the misguided are guided. The question, the Ummah has unanimously agreed in East and West that the human body has a sanctity, cannot be used for buying and selling. But there's no doubt this is a peculiar situation. Of course, necessities have their own set of rulings. If a person is in such a pressing, dire, urgent emergency, Allah permitted carrion blood and swine, pig flesh for cases of dire necessity. And so, first of all, the Ummah is sinful for leaving a woman to sell a part of her body to feed her children. Those who spend their wealth left and right in disobedience of Allah Azza wa Jalla, while people in our Ummah exist like this, or buying things that they don't really need, while others have to sell a part of their body. And there are things that people sell their children. This, the apples of their eyes, to sell them so that they can save the others. And so, in ordinary circumstances, the sanctity of the human body would not make it permissible. A person can gift one of his body parts to save someone's life, if that's not going to cost them their own life, like donating a kidney. But as a commercialization or selling, this would not be allowed in ordinary circumstances. But again, in cases of urgency, this is where concessions are made in the Sharia laws. We ask Allah one last time to remove his punishment, saying from the Ummah.
versus the mankind of global دعوة. سؤالي للأستاذنا الفاضل الشيخ الجليل الشيخ صلاح هو أستاذ سياسي يعني أنا أمس
Yes, it is a political question. The scholars and the jurists regarding the political condition, permissibility of elections and political rotation, and the lesser of two evils, and that was it. Now there's something new starting to spread in America, that the Muslims themselves in candidacy races, being governors and senators, and congressmen and likes. The question is, as a Muslim candidate, you find some of those who pick you, who vote you in, those that are liberals. This was a question that I posed yesterday from a different angle with regard to allyship. But there's just more empathy or common ground that comes from the liberal direction, or that's how people perceive it at least. And these are things that we all know. And you as a Muslim candidate, if you enter with a pure agenda, you'll lose. You'll lose the support from both sides. How do we balance between the benefit of putting Muslims in office? I serve the city council. You know, our budget is $200 million, so this is a person of great influence, and you certainly do have an effect on them, and you can effect so much good the better Muslims and non-Muslims. But how do we balance between these things? If you enter with an Islamic agenda, no one will pick you. If you enter with Islamic agenda, the governor of Michigan, for example, just to give an example, he said, I'll legalize marijuana.
This was the last question, as we have to end by the time. So,
you know, political participation is of the issues of siyasa sharia, instead of the administrative issues or the fall into the realm of Islamic politics, if you will. And this was a subject of great debate in the 70s and the 80s. Is this an approval of authorities other than our deen? But when fiqh assemblies, you know, came together and started having collective ijtihad performed after having wider discussions, even AMJA here, and the Organizations Islamic Conference, that is an extension of the Muslim World League, they permitted participation with conditions that are there in the declaration that you can go back to, and AMJA secondarily also adopted this view, and the discussion pretty much settled at that point. But determining in each case scenario on whether there's a greater benefit or a greater harm, that's a different story. It has to be judged on a case-by-case basis. Of course, it goes without saying, we're not saying our agenda is Islamic per se. It's not going to be like applying the Islamic Sharia or something. That's not going to be your agenda in politics. But the common ground, the public interests, public welfare, these which are congruent with Islam or encouraged by Islam will be your agenda. serving different racial groups, different communities, different minority populations. That we say our agenda has to be within those realms. Ya Jafar Idris, may Allah bless him and grant him cure. He used to say that for political work to work here, the Muslims have to agree on a clear political agenda and an entity that can represent them on the political level, speaking on behalf of them all in one voice, so that our votes are uh, concentrated in a place that would be good. And so, again, your agenda is not going to be Islamic. I don't think anyone's thinking about that, but it's going to be in the sphere of public welfare, public interests. And another issue, the base of the Sharia is on optimizing benefit and enhancing them and ending harm and eliminating it. So if you can't remove harm, remove as much of it as you can. If you cannot acquire goodness, acquire of it what you can. And this is an issue. Whoever can't do that, let them stay out of that realm and isolate themselves from the political arena, worshipping Allah Azza wa Jal to the best of their ability and protect themselves from the fitna. Meaning those that are incapable of discerning the pros and cons, it is better for them to remain in their prayer quarters, in their sphere of influence, learning the Islamic sciences and getting close to Allah Azza wa Jal and asking Allah to have them end their lives in good state. But those who work in the public sphere, you're going to have to endure and overlook certain interests and certain wrongs. As for idealism, that's a mentality that whomever that will cause you to write your own certificate of failure. There are two types of people that will be saved: a person that isolates himself from the fitan because he does not have it, and someone who memorized the Quran, the 40 Nawawi and the 60 Nawawi for that matter. But if you enter into public work, you gotta get yourself used to certain losses that you're going to have to tolerate, certain harms you're going to have to consider. What am I getting on the other end of this equation? And no one who does not know how to use that scale should participate, because some people can seek an insignificant gain for a monumental loss for da'wah or for Islam. And so a person that is capable of doing that is to try to do the best he can, and while remembering, of course, infallibilities for the Prophet ﷺ. And again, I just wish to conclude by saying what we said before, that no one should criticize those that have light that is blemished with darkness, unless you have a light, a perfect alternative that has no darkness in it.
Sometimes I feel that they by default give into these kind of ideas and things that morally we don't accept. See, by default is really coming by default. I'm willing to support, for example, 1, 2, 3 positions. You know what? You still can. There's many other areas. You still can contribute, and you can win the elections. I think the last election shows you clearly that you don't need to always to give up the things that you can do. Sometimes also we have principles, and you know what? We respect all differences. And I know how difficult this is. I'm not talking from being theoretical. But also what I want to tell you, that it's not correct for the Muslim community to be looked like advocates for these agendas of the liberal, of the leftists. social leftist in America. It's a shame that Muslim organizations will play the role of activists and people who promote these agendas. Not anymore that I'm talking about a situation that is shameful. I think we have to have a say, and that's what we believe in. Yes, I'm not going to pick this as a fight with you if I'm in your party, but I'm not expected to be an advocate for it. There's a big difference between the two positions and stands.
Can I just add something very briefly? We need to end this session. جزا الله خير كل المشايخ بارك الله فيكم ونعتذر للمشايخ الذين لم تتح لهم الفرصة بارك الله فيكم.
We apologize to those who didn't get a chance to answer, and we just have to end on time, keep to our schedule. Jazakallah khairan, everybody. I'll see you after lunch. Assalamu alaikum.